Live from the Plutopia News Network, this is the Plutopia Happy Hour. Or is it the Plutopia Fearful Hour?
Fearful hour. Yes,
We're
indeed.
talking about fear this time. We have the big three here. I'm Scoop Sweeney. That's John Lebkowski, and our good friend out there in the hinterlands of Taos, Maggie Duvall. How are the hinterlands, Maggie?
The
Are they here?
the hinterlands are very dry, very, very dry. But the hummingbirds are showing up, and the robins and the lilacs are going to bloom, and there's some good things too. So,
Well, we'll
where
put it
were
into
the
that.
hummingbirds?
they hang out and they hang out down south, I think, right? And,
Well, no, because they weren't here either. Or did
Well,
they
I
go
think they
farther
go-
south?
Yeah, I think they go to Mexico and then come up.
Yeah, they're down in Del Rio and Acuna, at the Club 8, and they're just having a good old time.
That's right.
So are they part of a cartel?
I think so.
Well, we've just set the academic level for this enterprise. How far down can we take it, folks?
Right.
We'll just experiment with that and see what we can do. Well, we were going to talk about fear tonight, and there's plenty of it. So we have a lot to talk about.
Well, I'm afraid already.
But when I suggested this topic, what I was really suggesting is that we talk about all the things that people are afraid of and what stokes that fear.
Yeah.
I fear that man's hair.
I fear that I'm going to end up with that hair. No, maybe not, because I don't have a starter crop here.
If you'd raise your head just a little bit, you'd have it right on there. Yep. There you go.
It's the new me. That just frightens the hell out of me and everyone that knows me. Well,
I
maybe
fear
not.
with Tucker Carlson talking about infrareding testicles to raise the sperm count that we're heading into the Republic of Gilead if we're not producing enough children.
I pray to God that he does that to himself.
Right.
I pray to all the gods and all the demons, please make Tucker do that. Maybe it'll
The
prevent
man with the
any more
sunburned balls. Well, I was just noticing that there are a number of stories in the media recently, like maybe for always, that are instigators of fear and loathing. They just scare the hell out of you. And I have come to believe that fear is being leveraged politically, and that fear is being used as a mechanism to keep people stoked and divided. But I don't know what to do about it.
Well, in the words of Ted Cruz, you have nothing to fear but me.
Yeah.
And that is enough to send me running and hiding under the bed any old day.
Oh, go ahead.
I just it's interesting to me. I think I brought this up in a recent show about like the fact that I haven't had a television set in probably 25 years. And I watch stuff, streaming here and there, but I'm not one of those people who listens to the news while I'm working or something like that. I just don't do that. I listen to music or whatever, and it's really been jarring to me, going into restaurants and all the TVs are on, just assaulting you, and I feel my stress rise through the roof when I'm exposed to that. And it's the same way, I haven't been on social media as much, hardly at all, just maybe to post a picture on Instagram or an occasional piece on Facebook. But I noticed that when I log on, I feel that same way that, the assault of the televisions and the restaurant makes me feel. It's like, it's just like a calculated, let's get your heart racing, let's get you freaked out, and of course Fox News is really good at that one. But yeah, I'm just always curious. And over the years I've brought it up, and it's really interesting how so many people have gotten kind of angry at me for bringing that up. Like, no, I'm not, it's not that at all, but it's like, well, what if you went cold turkey for a week, report back, and just
Oh
I'm just
no!
yeah, right. I'm just curious, like, how do you feel? Like, I mean, think about people that actually go on vacation and actually don't watch stuff or get on their social media. I have heard people say they feel like a million times better. They feel like their awareness is sort of expanded and not this sort of contracted kind of thing. So anyway, those are some of the things I think about.
Well, Maggie, that explains to me why you're not a resident of the Academy. There are many of us who qualify to go there, myself among many. But my wife Clarissa has been, bedridden for the last
Right.
few months because of her accident, and
Right.
she has made me not put CNN or MSNBC or
Ah,
any of the news stations, the cable news stations on. We'll watch, the occasional network
right.
thing. But I'll sneak off. I'm a news junkie, so I'll sneak off and hide under a blanket.
Well, that's been your career too,
Yeah,
right?
Yeah.
but she just laid down the law essentially that she really, in her words, I don't want to see that shit anymore. It's killing
Right.
me because I can't escape. She's a
Right.
dyed-in-the-wool gamer, and she loved to just, get off in her little, game room and go for it, and she can't
Right.
do that. So the only entertainment she was exposed to included CNN and the internal, disaster.
Right. Right. And there's something cool that I've noticed too, that like, since I moved here, I've started reading the local newspaper again, whether you agree with it or not, right? But there's something really profound about holding that newsprint and absorbing the article, not just kind of flipping through stuff. And then I've forgotten how much I enjoyed reading, the letters to the editor because they're well thought out. It's not like spur of the moment, like pronouncement on social media or yelling at you in the comments or whatever. That, and of course the police blotter is great entertainment, but there's just something about the slowing down, kind of absorbing. And I was like, oh yeah, I remember how I used to go and buy a copy of the New York Times on Sunday when I was in Berkeley, and just how great that was to read it because it gave you time to think about it. So I think about too that just immediacy thing.
Well, the whole thing of having that actual newspaper there, uh, that was my go-to, security blanket for a long time. I couldn't start the morning without coffee, paper. But then I realized I was spending $1,000 a year on the damn thing. It's like, wait, what can I do for $1,000? And spend pennies and get it on the little magic
Right.
box in front of my face. It's like, ooh,
Right.
well, that was an easy one. But it was tough because I really liked that whole tactile experience of holding
Right.
that thing in my hands. I used to go to the Cafe Med in Berkeley up on
Oh
Telegraph
yeah,
Avenue
I used to
and
go there. Yeah. Yeah.
sit up in the balcony with all the pseudo
Right.
intellectuals and read whatever thing I was trying to impress people with. The Village Voice. I had it right down.
Right. Yeah, totally. Yeah. Well, I think it's too, I read a lot of books, and it's my TV, and I'm, just sort of insatiable. It's a joke with my daughter, because I'm always, I'll get a stack of books from the library, and it's all nonfiction, right? So I'm curious as to what these different authors think about these current topics, right? I just find it fascinating, but they've researched it and they've thought about it. I'm like, wow, this is interesting, instead of that spur of the moment thing.
Yeah, some of my go-to authors, in fiction, seem to be plugged in quite well. One guy I read a lot is Neil Stevenson,
Right.
and he seems to be always about a year ahead of where we're headed, and it's kind of spooky. I'll read this, go,
Right.
well, I just read this a year ago, and here it is. And he's been real good at that. I mean, he's not 100%, but a lot of the trends seem to show up in him and several other authors, sci-fi and cyberpunk type
Right.
stuff.
I have a fear of Neil Stevenson.
Okay. Why does he scare you?
He's a scary looking guy. Have you ever seen Neil Stevenson?
Yeah. Well, he's scary if you're pissed, if you get him pissed off at you. I've seen him smile though.
Yeah, I wouldn't want him pissed off at me. Actually, I think that he's not very sociable. I think that he spends a lot of time buried in his head and in the creation of the novels he's writing, and he's prolific. And you can imagine, given that he writes like very long, carefully plotted science fiction novels, that takes a lot of focus and effort and concentration. And I suspect he feels very little desire to leave his desk and go out into the world, which he did recently at South by Southwest.
Mm-hmm.
His latest book is about climate change. And there's another book by Kim Stanley Robinson about climate change. And I'm lagging here because I'm trying to remember the name of these books. Do you know the name of the Neil Stevenson book by any chance?
Well, I would if you hadn't asked me, but
Because Kim Stanley Robinson's book is called The Ministry for the Future, and it's a pretty scary book. I've read about half of it. I'm not really through with it yet. And I find myself wondering if I want to read the Neil Stevenson book, or if I even want to read about or think about climate change anymore, because it's called Termination Shot, the Neil Stevenson one.
Okay. All right.
So I started thinking about climate change in the very late 90s. And what got me there was Bruce Sterling, a science fiction author that I know, who wrote a book called Heavy Weather. And
I read that.
And it's about people who hack tornadoes. And in researching that book, he came to realize that climate change is a potentially catastrophic effect that we should all be concerned about, and that we should all be, taking some kind of action, to forestall it if possible. And that's what we were saying back then. And he started giving talks about it. And we kind of thought at the time that if we started talking about it a lot, and if we found strategies to make it a more and more of a conscious thing for people, that eventually there would be some people would take action. And that's not the case. That's not what's happened. In fact, it's been very difficult to get some percentage of the people, especially people in power who could have an effect, to take climate change seriously. And there's been a propaganda war about climate change. There have been, various information campaigns to sort of try to convince people that it's not established science, that it's not settled. And it was a problem because scientists a really good scientist will tell you that they make hypotheses and they try to find the best evidence and so forth, but they're kind of wary of stating anything as absolutely true. This will happen. This is exactly the way it's going to be. And climate scientists had been less aggressive than they might have been in making the point that, there's a real danger here and we need to do something about it. And I learned that from talking to some climate scientists where they were saying, we really probably have to forget our usual approach to science, where we don't really want to regard anything as completely settled because you continue investigating, right?
Right.
And you have the best evidence at your that you can find, and you come up with hypotheses. And hypothetically, it looked like climate change was going to be disastrous. And they realized that they really needed to start just saying that. Said, look, this is too dangerous for us to be like I don't want to say wishy-washy, but that is kind of the way it is.
Mm-hmm.
Science is kind of wishy-washy in a sense, because a really good scientist really isn't going to assert themselves in some sense of the absolute. So what's happened is that over the years you've had this divide that's happened, and there's so many other divides that are sort of along the same lines, where you have this one set of people who are really in fear of like catastrophic climate change. You have another set of people who aggressively refuse to believe that climate change is anthropogenic rather, and that it is going to have such a disastrous effect. Everything's being overstated, et cetera, et cetera.
Mm-hmm.
And if they fear anything, they fear that the people who fear climate change are going to create laws that will have economic effects that they consider counterproductive, and that sort of thing. So there's this big foo-for-all going on, where you've got people taking sides and a big division. Wasn't helped by, one of the things I think that created more problems than it resolved was the Al Gore activist response in creating like An Inconvenient Truth, the film that he made about climate change.
Right.
But that tended to politicize it because Al Gore is famously a Democrat.
Yeah.
So we have a mess. And meanwhile, we are starting to see the effects of climate change. It's less hypothetical than it was when we started. And Bruce thought that maybe he could get some traction by, instead of talking to environmentalists or people who are kind of already there, and instead of, he didn't want to make it boring, among other things. So he launched something called the Viridian Design Movement. He says, design movements get into people's heads, so this is a good way to get into people's heads. And
it's a kind of proactive thing, right? Right.
Yeah. And he was addressing futurists and designers and big thinkers. And it really did have an effect in that it advanced the understanding of climate change. And for a while, it looked like, there was going to be some critical mass behind mitigation efforts, that sort of thing. But it really hadn't worked. It worked somewhat, but it hadn't been enough.
Right.
And meanwhile, we find that people are increasingly fearful of the effects of climate change, and that they have a sense of helplessness about it because it's such a big problem.
Right.
And the solution to the problem requires a substantial transformation of the way that we live, that, there hasn't been a will to do it. In fact, people haven't even thought it through. Some people may still believe that if they buy an electric car, that's going to have an impact, but it's starting to have a very big impact. So people are increasingly fearful about it, and the conversations become increasingly emotional rather than rational. And that's happening in a lot of stuff.
You know what bubbled up for me when you're talking about this is I remember when my mother passed away. I took Hunter, my daughter, in to see her body, right? And then she also participated in her, the funeral we did, where we did like a wake at my mom's childhood home, and we had her ashes, and everybody was holding her ashes and all that. And, Hunter just, I told her the story about like, grandma's spacesuit wore out, right? So it was like her exploratory suit on this planet and all that. And she totally got it, and there wasn't this fear. And I when I told other parents that I'd done this, they were absolutely horrified, like that I'd done something horrible to my daughter. And I was thinking about it. It's like when I was a kid and people passed away, it really pissed me off that nobody would tell me what's going on, right? There was not a trust that maybe I can handle it just fine. And I feel like in our society, whether it's climate change or whatever, it's like this idea that like, just tell us what's going on, because then we can figure out how to deal with it, right? There's this kind of, benevolent hiding us from the truth. It's sort of like what they say, they'll with, what's the term for the visitation or UFOs? Like, when are we going to have why is the term?
Disclosure?
Disclosure. Thank you. It's like, well, it's been there forever, but we don't want to let people know because, it would just freak people out. And it's like, well, it's going to really freak people out when these aliens appear and you've been hiding it all the time. What do you think's going to happen? So,
well, it's kind of interesting that in our culture, we sort of avoid the personal and local experience of someone's death that is kind of suppressed or is kind of marginalized, and nobody kind of wants to go to a funeral or whatever.
And that's not the case in Mexico, right?
Right.
The dead are living with us all the time, and it's like, it's just a transition thing. But here in America, we're like totally freaked out by it. And
what's really weird about it is that we don't think anything of showing all kinds of violent death in media, in films and in television, sort of unreal depictions of death, but the actual reality of death we sort of push away from us.
Well, Maggie, I hate to do this, but I'm going to have to just turn you in as a child abuser. How dare you give that child a rational explanation of life and death that doesn't just send you off into a weeping paranoia. I'm going to be next. I'm going to die.
Right.
It's like that's how death was addressed in my generation.
Right.
I've gotten to the point now I just don't go. It's like I'll speak well of the people. I'll send condolences, but I do not participate in those ceremonies because I watched. My mom's funeral was really nice because we got her Native American ancestry involved. We had the Lord's
you're Choctaw, right?
Yeah, we had a recording of the Lord's Prayer in Choctaw.
Wow!
By a member of the tribal council that we played. Terrified, not terrified, but horrified. The local Baptist lady who showed up for the funeral. But going to my dad's funeral, my sister's funeral, it's like it was just a fiesta of horror. It's it's like you're supposed to celebrate their life, but you don't. You go in and celebrate, how pissed off you are that they got out and you're still here.
Right. And I remember my mom telling me, her mother died when she was only, mom was only 12. So it was already horrific for her. right? And then my grandmother was from like New England blue blood kind of family, right? So the funeral was like an Edward Gorey cartoon. It was like they had the long black veils and, the hearse taking the casket and all this stuff. And it was raining. And my mom said it was horrible because already it's creepy. It's like a horror movie. And then no one would tell her what was going on. Nobody, like the children must stay over here. And like, and so it messed her up for a really long time. And you've heard people say before, I'm sure, like, if we learn to face our own death, then we learn how to live. Most people, and I believe this, are, we see it in our society with the obsession with Botox and augmentation, all that to stay younger. I believe they're running from death, right? And like, what would it look like in our society if we turned and faced it, and then the fear goes away, and then we're like, oh, this is life. This is, because we know it's going to happen to everybody. That's the thing. It's
What would be
universal.
really creepy is if they really did solve the old, aging of the body thing, and we have all these people, that on their deathbed they look like they did at 20. It's like,
Yeah. Hey, but it makes the mortician's job easy,
that just
right?
creeps me out.
Right.
But
You don't
John,
have
John, you were talking about Bruce's novel Heavy Weather, and I read that when it first came out, and I really liked it because I had known some storm chasers, and I was actually a storm chaser in our hometown
really?
in the radio station remote radio van. When there was a
Wow.
tornado, I had to go out and chase it and tell people where it was and scare the hell out of them.
See, I was the
But
opposite of a storm chaser.
But when I read that, I was impressed, especially when later on I saw the developments in the storm chasing scene, and it pretty much mirrored what Bruce was writing about. Drones and superstorms coming up because the climate had just gotten out of control, and it was very prophetic. And I reread it a few years ago. It's like, well, a lot of this is already here, Bruce. Thanks.
Well, it's kind of interesting how our perception of that kind of weather, like tornadoes, for instance, has inevitably changed because there's so many cameras and people can capture video so easily. It used to be that you didn't see.
Right.
It was rare for someone to actually get film of a tornado, but once everybody had a sophisticated digital camera in their pocket, suddenly you have all of these great videos of tornadoes popping up, and you can kind of watch them closely and see what they do. What was it? It was in Round Rock recently when the tornado hit there. It headed right into a webcam that was mounted there, or a video camera. So you saw the tornado just kind of coming in and hitting the camera, and you got a real good sense of what it's like to be inside of a tornado.
Yeah, when that happened, I was watching it on TV. They were showing the radar track that was headed right to my neighborhood. It missed our house by probably maybe 3/4 of a mile. It was
Yeah.
just to the west. And fortunately, but unfortunately, it hit a lot of our neighbors who were just up the road. And I went running out when we lost power. I mean, it wiped out everything, power,
Right.
internet. So I went out, and my next door neighbor Joey was out there. He had just gotten back from work, and he has his phone out. He says, "You got to look at this," and he had taken a video of the tornado as it was on US 290 and starting to wipe stuff out. And that confirmed me, yeah, we really did have a tornado.
Yeah.
I just thought maybe we'd just had a storm that we lost power, but it was way more funky than that.
Right. My friends Marva and Ellen live out in Elgin, more south of 290 and that area.
Yeah, it's my neighborhood.
But yeah, but before you get to 95 and all that. So anyway, like I remember I was checking in with Marva, and then she said, "Yeah, we know stuff happened nearby, but nothing here." And then the next day, she's like, "Oh my God, y'all! Look at this. Her neighbor had a GoPro like on his fence, and the funnel formed over their combined yards and moved. So that one that was like barreling across, it was like, blah. But thinking of all that, yeah, I think about the before and after, the prevalence of all these cameras. I remember when I, like before I moved to California, I'd already been in tornadoes and hurricanes. And then I get there and everyone was impressed by that because like, hey, nobody, like we've never been through anything like that. And a lot of people I knew at the time were transients to the Bay Area, right? And then after, of course, Loma Prieta and the Oakland Hills fire happened, and I was in Oakland for both of them. Like I would tell people, like I've been in all these natural disasters, and everybody was like, "Oh my God, I can't even imagine that." Well, fast forward to now, like how many people we're all in like fires and tornadoes and these massive hurricanes, and like I wish people would kind of step back and look at that. Like it's constant now and everybody's experiencing it. It's really interesting.
And climate change has caused a lot of that exponential growth of these disasters. What's going on right now in Arizona and New Mexico?
Right.
I mean, those are some serious firestorms, and there's stuff that the locals there were saying on the news that it's never been like this in the past. It's suddenly gotten really, really bad. We're in the great, Western U.S. drought. It's really dry all over the Western U.S.
I believe it's been 20 years now, and I was looking at the warning map for us tomorrow about those 60 to 80 mile an hour winds. And it showed, the Edwards Plateau. It goes all the way to the Edwards Plateau. So it'll be interesting what you all deal with. And and I think a lot, I have a lot of, one of my interests is in Chacoan culture and that kind of thing. And, I think about like, they're pretty sure what moved people at the time was drought. And I think about Chacoan culture and that time period, you had like the massive temple building in Central and South America and in North America. And, there's pretty general consensus that it was a time of like real hierarchical, top heavy, bureaucratic for the time, like civilization. And then they overused the resources and the drought hit. And I think we're kind of in the same thing. So I don't think it's like, it hasn't been anything that's happened before in our lifetimes, of course, but I think, from all I've read, it's like, it sounded like real similar. There had been like rainfall and kind of plenty in that like meridian that goes Chaco down to Mexico, but then it stopped. And so there was nothing at Mesa Verde. Everyone moved toward rivers. So they moved toward the Rio Grande. So all the pueblos trace their ancestry to the Chacoan culture. So anyway, so that's a little sidetrack, but I'm really interested in patterns and similarities and that kind of thing. And
well, the fall of the Maya, the Mayan Empire was big and really advanced, really well organized, and all of a sudden they just abandoned their whole their culture, moved elsewhere simply because they could no longer support what they had going there because the resources were gone.
Right.
And, I'm guessing through a combination of bad management and bad luck with the weather and the resources like water and bad land use. And
maybe they had supply chain issues.
Yeah.
Right, exactly.
Supply chain disruptions.
I think there's something to that because as they've shown, there was a massive trade, there was huge trade going, out to Ohio, and, there's evidence everywhere that there was this these major trade routes and all that.
Well,
Yeah.
maybe they had open borders and they were just overrun by other people who were different from them.
Mostly pale-faced people, from what I understand.
Well, I was reading recently about these people that I'm pointing over this way toward the west, in like northwest of Abiquiu. There was a culture that was there briefly that built these towers, and when the archaeologist, they were there about the same time the Chacoan culture was just starting to sort of collapse. And from the evidence they found, the people that lived in these pit houses around these towers and all that, they found evidence of them burned alive. That's not funny, but in these towers, and these people were not from this area. They were more like Mayan. So there's thoughts that people were moving out of Mesa Verde, Chaco, and then there weren't enough resources, and then these were interlopers, so it's just fascinating reading all this stuff, and yeah up I'm pointing my screen, you can't even see it.
Whoop, I lost Abiquiu.
There you go.
There you go.
There you go. Yeah, so up northwest of the lake where there's more green.
Is this the lake here?
Yeah, that's the lake. So go northwest a bit. Yeah.
Up in here.
That little tongue sticking down that whole area. The Guyana culture. Yeah, it's pretty fascinating.
Guyana, here's Guyana down here. Yeah. Oh, very interesting. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think it's interesting that people are fearing. Their fear is sort of misplaced. I mean, for instance, there's this terrible fear of pedophiles, the pedophiles in the Democratic Party,
That's right.
Pizza.
Well, I mean, how many pedophiles are there really? It's a problem. There's definitely sex trafficking going on and pedophiles and so forth, not in a particular political party. I mean, it's,
right.
And it's a problem. It's a known problem. But is it a bigger problem than climate change? How is it that you could ignore climate change yet be completely fearful of this other thing that you think is going on?
Well, you could be fearful of transgender people more than you're fearful of all the really horrendous stuff that's going on around. That's, the big thing in Florida this week. The government there is lashing out against Mickey Mouse because Disney dared to defend the rights of trans people.
Yeah, we finally find out that Mickey Mouse is gay.
Well, one of Disney's grandchildren has come out as trans, and they're fighting for against this bullshit. And yeah, my personal theory is that, and I'm sticking with it, is that all these people who there is sex trafficking, we know that there is pedophilia, we know that. But like you're saying, John, it's not limited to one party. I think these people that are obsessed about it and combating it are the ones that fantasize about it the most. The ones that are against, just like we say, like, you're anti-gay, you're probably fantasizing about it, and you're suppressing, who you really are. I mean, everything always seems with these people to be projection. Look at the fact
there is that thing about, homophobic people who actually deeply inside are actually drawn to homosexuality, drawn to the same sex. And
there's nothing wrong with that.
What they fear about it most is that part of themselves is drawn to it,
Right, exactly.
My mom always had this saying of the guilty dog barks loudest, and I found that to be pretty much the case.
She's a smart woman. Yes, absolutely. Yeah,
well, I can kind of get it. I try to make my think my way into the heads of people who are feeling this way. And I was thinking recently, I mean, obviously what we have in this country is a backlash among people who think that people should be white, they should be Christian, they should identify with the gender,
Mhm.
of their birth. They shouldn't like move to a different gender column, I guess it is.
They
And
should only eat at Chick-fil-A and buy
but
my
that's
pillow. And yeah,
really a manifestation of fear of this
Right.
difference.
Right.
Um, People fear gay people, or fear that they're homophobic, they're transphobic, because it's something that's really different, and that they're uncomfortable like trying to open up to that sort of thing. And we had a kind of opening going on, and it really, I mean, we're actually more open about that probably than we ever have been.
Right.
And the rainbow flag means something, right? But at the same time, the people who are not open to that are, they've been working really hard to take power because their fear is so powerful. And their fear is so powerful that it enables their manifestation of power, to the extent that they seem to be, winning. If there's a war going on, they seem to be winning the war. The war of monoculture versus multiculture. And I don't really completely understand that. I think that most people are not on board with them, with this idea that
Right.
we should just have a monoculture, that we should just have,
Yeah. What a
the
boring
people.
world.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But
a lot of people are on board with that, not because they believe it, because they're afraid that it might affect their career or their relationship with people. So they may think it's okay, but they don't want to say it's okay in public.
Well, that's why I go back to, again, one of the best books I've read this year is Caste by Isabel Wilkerson. And it's something I've always suspected. It's the idea, just like the caste system in India, the caste system here, which explains why women like fight against other women, right? Like women don't fight for women's rights. The reason is because they have, and I'm talking mostly white women, they have their place on the ladder. They like the idea of being the woman on the pedestal, the good, the good Christian woman who's right living, and she's adored by her, her family, and blah, blah. And this whole idea that it's like this ladder thing, that you do not want anyone displacing you on the ladder. So you're just going to be kicking down to make them go away, because it's the idea of, maintaining what has been the power structure in this country since its founding, which is, the white patriarchal culture. So, if, I imagine these, like you said, John, the way you try to put yourself in someone's mind, like, to like, I'm not saying just women, but I'm saying these women because I know them better. They're like, if these people that are trying to be accepted are right, somehow that means I'm diminished or I'll disappear. Whereas the people who want diversity and acceptance are like, honey, you'd be part of it too. You're not going to go away. But they cannot think anything different other than, where I am on the, the dog eat dog totem pole, and that whole dog eat dog thing was not what Darwin even said in the first place. It's just been given that, like, you got to fight your way and all that. So it's really sad that, like they all think that they're all going to be killed or die, because that's the way they think, if people are just afforded the right to exist,
My dogs never ate dogs. They ate my homework.
right?
Well,
Or
that
got into
explains
your
a lot.
chicken coop. Yeah.
People should fear dogs.
Have
And
nothing
they
to
run in
fear but
packs.
dog itself.
They have
Oh.
fangs. Actually, people should fear cats.
The sweetest dogs turn into monsters when they run in packs. That's a problem out here in New Mexico.
Well, what happened to the state of our fear with COVID?
I know, it just magically
pandemic is
vanished.
well, but pandemic is another thing that sort of divided people into people who were rational about it, people who were fearful about it, and people who were sort of ignorant of the implications of it and lacked fear because they were really just being basically ignorant.
Well, I'm not afraid. Well, actually, you know, we're talking about COVID experienced this week. My wife gets home health treatments from a home health company. It's been really good, but all of a sudden they're putting her into a skilled nursing rehab facility that the ones they've recommended are all ones with bad reputations who killed a lot of people during COVID.
Oh my
And
God.
it's like, no, I don't think. I mean, she was way ahead. I was just like, no, no way. And it's like, I would love for her to be able to get that kind of care, but all the studies I've seen lately about the people that were in charge of these facilities, they're not really people. They're hedge funds, big
Right.
multinational corporations who own. They just don't. They're not the mom and pop organization down the street. They're they own hundreds and hundreds of facilities, and they are not in it as a
Care.
charitable act. They're in it for a profit. And how
It's
do you
for the
profit?
bottom line.
You cut the cost. You lay off some personnel.
Right.
You cut the hours of the people who cost you the most, which are usually the skilled nurses. So it's like, I read
Right.
all of that. It's like, no, I don't think so.
Right. Yeah. I just finished a chapter in, here's another book you could pull up, John. It's Davos Man, How Billionaires Destroyed the World or Conquered the World. Anyway, it's horrific because it's going after all these hedge funders that basically own the whole world. It's not just America, but I just got out of the chapter where the reason why the COVID hit so bad in Italy was because what had been more like national healthcare had been bought out by these hedge funds. And like here too, the whole idea that we didn't have enough supplies because of, for the mask and stuff for supply chain. We could have had it, but these hedge funds own all these healthcare companies in the United States. And to cut costs, they didn't want to have inventory because you have to pay for it. It's just horrific. And then he went into the whole thing about they wouldn't let on to people how severe COVID was because they didn't want to lose the high ticket surgery patients, that were coming in for the big buck stuff. It's horrific. It's horrible, and I just get so, yeah. And then Mark Benioff, or whatever his name is, trying to pretend he's Mr. Conscious Capitalism and all that, and providing, our jets brought in all these supplies and stuff. It's like, well, if you're paying your damn taxes, we wouldn't have to do stuff like this. It's just, this reporter who wrote the book has been hanging with these people for quite some time. So he puts together the pieces of how insidious and underlying everything these hedge funders are.
Well, the venture
there's the argument.
hedge funds are notorious in the field of business because they really don't care if the company is is successful, they care about being able to make money off of their assets. That's what happened.
Absolutely.
Sears, Roebuck and Company used to be the biggest retailer on the planet,
Right.
and they don't exist anymore because a hedge funder got control and just
Right.
started selling off the assets.
Right.
So yeah, that's how a lot of these companies that used to be big have suddenly just disappeared. It's like they were cut up and dealt out like bologna onto a sandwich. Like,
Well,
That's what they call financialization.
well, that's what I brought up several episodes of Plutopia back. A full article in the Atlantic about a hedge funder that's bought up all these newspapers around the country and done the same thing. So decimated them. So people that were actually working hard to report the news, are gone, or they'd have like one person on the staff writing all the stories and stuff like that.
I hear a rumor that somebody wants to buy Twitter
yes,
Oh my
God
God.
forbid.
and do something to it. I'm not sure what. Launch it into space.
All the conservatives are excited about that because, like, finally he's going to champion us and our right to,
Well, to Twitter's credit, they are considering the poison pill to keep him at bay, and that would be a very good move.
Well, it's interesting that they assume that because he's crazy that he's a conservative like them.
I know, right?
It doesn't necessarily follow. He may surprise them. I've never thought of Elon Musk as necessarily a conservative or a liberal. The whole liberal conservative thing is so kind of ridiculous. I mean, people can't be who they are. They have to be aligned with some identity or some label that
Right.
that people have assigned to them. And it's really that labeling has a real sort of straw man aspect to it, where it's like you say, okay, this person is a liberal, and that means that he believes this and this and this and this,
Right.
and it may be that he doesn't believe any of those things, and that his thinking is much more complex and it's much more nuanced. We can't really have discussions about that now because
Right.
it's all like stereotyped identities fighting with stereotyped identities.
Well, I remember one of the last conversations I had with my brother, who's gone total Trump, right? Which blows my mind, but hey, what are you going to do? I care about people. I care about my friends that, couldn't have access to healthcare, like simple things, just caring about humanity. Right. And I have talked about some things like supporting that. And I remember one time he said, well, you people who think this, whatever. And I'm like, what are you talking about? What is the you people?
Libs.
You like, it's like, well, if you really sat down and talked to me, that's why I like, John, that you've talked about, you don't identify as, and like what I was telling him is like, I'm for common sense. If there was a common sense party, just like stay out of my womb. I like the fiscal conservative. Like, how do we do programs so that we're generating our own fun? There's so many nuances to it all, but like you said, everything's so.
I've been hearing a lot about this Twitter account, Libs of TikTok. This person they were trying to hide their identity, and I think that there was a disclosure.
They doxed them. Yeah.
But it's it's kind of crazy. It's this whole thing about own the libs or libtards, whatever. God, the idea that liberals have
a life, for God's sake.
People, they complain about being woke, and what woke really is supposed to mean is that you believe in like social justice and equality. That's terrible to believe something like that.
I know. That's insane.
How dare you?
Yeah, exactly.
Well,
but the argument is not that they think it's bad that somebody believes in social justice and equality, but that somebody who believes in social justice and equality might try to force them to be just and egalitarian,
Well, Elon, may not be a conservative, but he is definitely anti something because just his whole reason for moving to Texas, he, well, he's definitely anti-union, anti-labor
Right.
because he was outraged by the fact that he was expected in California to treat his employees with some form of respect and to provide them with a decent
Right.
a decent wage and decent benefits. Like, how dare you make me do that? So I categorize him more under that old category of the entitled rich boy that knows no boundaries. And
Right.
I'm just
Right.
not sure that I know. I mean, the same could be true of him. That this thing that I was talking about earlier, maybe his thinking is a lot more nuanced than that, and maybe you know maybe there are some merits to things he believes and not others. He seems a little nutty. I mean, some of the things he's been posting. Maybe he's a prankster, or maybe he is just loony. But I don't. I haven't got into his head, and I kind of don't really understand. I can't claim to understand what motivates Elon Musk.
Well, there's two things about him that I think, like, I'm really, really, really over like the tech bros like salivating over their, libertarian-esque heroes, right? Just always like, these guys can do no wrong. Like, you can't fault them because they're making money and they're doing it their way and all that. And it's like, just please freaking stop it. The second thing is, I would love him. I would love any of these bazillionaires if they would go like, I have all the money in the world. I literally have all the money in the world. What would it be like if I treated all my employees like we were partners in something together? If I showed my employees respect, and it's not just giving them a couple more dollars an hour. It's like, I mean, I worked in a company that was privately held and profitable in Berkeley. And I was treated like a co-founder, even though I wasn't. And the difference in everyone being treated that way in how the company functioned was beautiful. I mean, it's like everybody shared in it. And nobody was faulting the owners for these rich guys trying to start a company and being rich because they were rich, they started it, but we all were doing really well too, and they didn't need to, like pay us shit. I was paid really well, I just don't understand this need to hoard everything and everybody else be damned. Like, how do we break that sickness?
yeah, I think those people watch too many episodes of The Simpsons and really, got a hard on for the boss at the nuclear power plant. It's like,
Right.
oh, gee, I want to be just like him. He's so good. He oppresses those people. It's like,
And
oh,
like
okay.
quoting nonstop from the freaking Fountainhead and all that shit. I'm like so done with that.
Ayn Rand.
Yeah. Yeah.
She was strange.
You're being kind.
Well, I don't know. I mean, people get a lot of shit in their heads. I'm sort of biased against concepts. I think concepts are problematic. I mean, people get concepts in their heads and they get attached to the concept, and
What's a good concept? How would you explain one concept? Do you have a good example?
a good concept.
I know we only have a minute left, but like, what's a good example?
Oh, a good example of a concept. Well, here's one: cancel culture. So that's a concept. And, the thing is that when you explore it, you find that it's not really a culture. And the cancel thing is just a normal kind of human thing that people have done forever,
Right.
Pulling
from the herd.
So you have this word, this concept, and it sort of suggests something, and people get an idea in their head what it represents, and it's not necessarily true that everybody's talking about the same thing when they use it. They've got these concepts in their head about it, and
Right.
they're not necessarily very They don't
Like
necessarily
critical
have a lot
race
of
theory.
depth.
Yeah.
Well, or just democracy. I mean,
Right.
I've often argued that when people talk about democracy, they're not necessarily all on the same page about what it is they're talking about.
Right.
So you've got to be very careful to like define what it is you mean by democracy when
Right.
you're talking
Good luck
about
with
it.
that.
I think this culture is about to be canceled because we're out of time. folks.
I know. I'm trying to find my button here. There's my button.
Hit that cancel button.
That's
We
right.
can cancel this show right now because we are done. We're through. We've talked for an hour and it went by fast.
Right.
That's great. Let's do this again
That's
next
do it
week.
again.
All right.
Bye.
Thanks
Over
so
and out.
much.
Thank
It's been
you.
great to see you. And
Feel better,
off-
John.
off we
Great
go. I will.
indeed.
I will.
All
I'm
right.
working on it. I've got hydrocodone. I'm going to be okay.
I'm good.
Oh, we're not feeling so